September 17th, 1942. Wehrmacht High Command Headquarters, Rastenburg, East Prussia. The laughter echoed through the oak-panelled conference room as General der Panzertruppe Wilhelm von Schröder passed around captured intelligence photographs from North Africa, American tanks. The M3 Grant, with its sponson-mounted gun protruding awkwardly from the hull like a naval cannon from centuries past. The officers gathered around the mahogany table could barely contain their amusement. Americans building tanks, von Schröder scoffed, adjusting his monocle while studying the images, like asking a watchmaker to forge a sword. They have no tradition, no understanding of armored warfare. These are tractors with guns bolted on. Colonel Ernst Kellermann, veteran of Poland, France, and the recent victories in Russia, traced his finger across the technical specifications that German intelligence had obtained through neutral Switzerland. The armor thickness made him shake his head in disbelief. 60 millimeters on the front hull, our Panzer IIIs from 1937 had better protection. And look at this design. The gun cannot traverse. The crew must turn the entire vehicle to aim. Did they learn nothing from the last war? The room filled with confident predictions. The Americans were industrialists, not warriors. They built automobiles for housewives and delivery trucks for groceries. The few tanks they might produce would be curiosities, mechanical embarrassments that would provide target practice for the Wehrmacht's battle-hardened panzer divisions. What none of them could imagine was that within 18 months, American factories would be producing more tanks in a single month than Germany managed in a quarter. The mathematics of industrial warfare were about to receive a devastating new equation. The contempt had deep roots. Since 1939, the Wehrmacht's panzer divisions had revolutionized warfare. Poland fell in 27 days. France, with the world's largest tank force, surrendered in 6 weeks. The British had been driven from the continent at Dunkirk. In Operation Barbarossa, German tanks had destroyed thousands of Soviet vehicles in the opening months. The Panzer IV, backbone of the German armored force, had proven itself from the Arctic Circle to the Sahara Desert. Its 75mm gun could destroy any Allied tank at combat ranges. The newer Tiger, just entering production, mounted an 88mm gun that could penetrate any known armor at distances exceeding 2,000 meters. These were not just machines, but expressions of German engineering excellence, products of a nation that had been designing and building tanks since the 1920s, albeit secretly at first. Major Otto Fleischer, who had served under Guderian himself in France, delivered lectures at the Panzer Training School in Munster, explaining to eager cadets why American entry into the war meant nothing for armored warfare. The United States has no tank tradition. They sat out the Great War's tank battles. They have no Guderian, no Rommel, no masters of armored warfare. Their army in 1940 possessed fewer than 400 tanks, most of them obsolete. They are starting from zero. The first warning signs appeared in intelligence reports from Japanese observers in America during early 1941. A Japanese military attaché, Colonel Yamamoto Ichiro, had toured the Chrysler Corporation's facilities in Detroit. His coded message to Tokyo, intercepted by German intelligence but largely dismissed, described something unprecedented. The Americans are not building a tank factory. They are converting their entire automobile industry. I observed assembly lines longer than our battleships. Workers, including women, operating machinery that would require 12 men in Japan. They speak of building tanks the way they build automobiles, thousands per month. But in Berlin, such reports were dismissed as either Japanese exaggeration or American propaganda. Reichsminister Fritz Todt, head of German war production, reviewed the reports with skepticism. Impossible. Tank construction requires skilled craftsmen, specialists who understand armor welding, precision gunsmithing. You cannot simply take workers who assembled civilian automobiles yesterday and expect them to build fighting vehicles today. It would take years to train such a workforce. General Franz Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, had calculated Germany's advantages with typical Prussian precision. By his estimation, it took German factories approximately 1,500 man-hours to produce a Panzer IV. The new Tiger required nearly 6,000 man-hours. These were not mere assemblies, but crafted weapons, each requiring specialized knowledge passed down through generations of metalworkers. Even if the Americans could build tanks, Halder reasoned, they would face the same constraints that limited German production: skilled labor, specialized tooling, quality materials. "You cannot mass-produce excellence," he wrote in his diary on December 3, 1941, 4 days before Pearl Harbor. The Americans will learn this painful lesson. But Halder's calculations failed to account for something revolutionary: the American approach to production itself. While Germans built tanks like precision instruments requiring master craftsmen, Americans were preparing to revolutionize manufacturing through simplification and standardization. The transformation began not with military theorists, but with automobile executives who understood mass production as a science. The Chrysler Corporation's president, K.T. Keller, had received a phone call from William Knudsen, head of the Office of Production Management, in June 1940. The conversation was brief. "Can Chrysler build tanks?" Keller's response would echo through history. "I don't know. I've never seen one. Send me a blueprint." Within 72 hours, Chrysler engineers had not just studied the blueprints, but identified 1,800 ways to improve the production process. Where traditional tank manufacturing required skilled welders to carefully join armor plates, Chrysler designed jigs and fixtures that allowed workers with minimal training to achieve consistent results. Where German tanks required hand-fitting of components, American engineers designed parts with tolerances that permitted interchangeability. The Detroit Arsenal tank plant broke ground in Warren, Michigan, on September 19, 1940. The statistics defied comprehension. 1.25 million square feet of production space, erected in 8 months. Albert Kahn, the architect, designed the facility to withstand aerial bombardment with 3-foot-thick concrete walls, yet the building went up faster than German factories could retool for a new model. By April 1941, before the factory walls were even complete, the first M3 Grant rolled off the assembly line. Workers had built it while snow still fell through the unfinished roof. The dedication ceremony on April 24, 1941, became a moment of national pride. The 30-ton steel monster fired its guns, smashed through telephone poles, and demolished a mock house before assembled dignitaries and workers. The production system itself revolutionized tank manufacturing. Instead of skilled craftsmen working on complete vehicles, the assembly line broke construction into 30-second tasks. A worker might spend 8 hours installing the same bolt on every tank that passed, achieving a precision through repetition that exceeded what craftsmen achieved through skill. The supply chain stretched across 48 states: armor plate from Pittsburgh, engines from Detroit, tracks from Akron, instruments from Cleveland, radios from Fort Wayne. Railroad cars arrived at the plant every 17 minutes, 24 hours a day, delivering components from 1,456 primary contractors and over 11,000 subcontractors. German intelligence initially refused to believe American production claims. When reports suggested the Detroit Arsenal alone was producing 400 tanks monthly by March 1942, Wehrmacht Intelligence Chief Admiral Wilhelm Canaris dismissed them as propaganda. No nation can produce tanks at such speed without catastrophic quality problems. These will be death traps for their own crews. But the reality was even more staggering. In December 1942, the Detroit Arsenal set a production record that would stand throughout the war: 896 Sherman tanks in a single month. The plant's 5,000 workers had achieved what German planners deemed physically impossible. By war's end, this single factory would produce 22,234 tanks, nearly 25% of America's total tank production of 89,568 vehicles. The first reality check came at El Alamein in October 1942. Major Heinrich Richter, commanding a battalion of Panzer IIIs in the 15th Panzer Division, encountered the new American M4 Sherman tanks, operated by the British 8th Army. His after-action report, discovered in captured German archives, revealed growing concern. The American tanks appeared in numbers we did not expect. My battalion engaged approximately 40 enemy tanks, destroying 12. But behind them came 40 more, then 40 more after that. Their frontal armor, though inferior to our Tigers, could deflect our 50mm guns at combat ranges. More disturbing, every tank seemed identical, as if stamped from the same press. When we captured one for examination, we found something remarkable. Every part had a number. Every component was labeled with installation instructions, so simple a child could follow them. The engine, we discovered, was the same Ford motor used in their civilian trucks, modified for tank use. Any mechanic familiar with civilian vehicles could maintain it. This was not tank building as we understood it. This was mass production applied to warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Zimmermann, a staff officer who had helped plan the invasion of France, studied captured American maintenance manuals in early 1943. His report to OKH reflected growing alarm. The Americans have eliminated the craftsmen from tank production. Their vehicles are designed not for perfection but for replacement. Where we spend 200 hours perfecting the fit of armor plates, they spend 20 hours on adequate welding and move to the next vehicle. Where we build one excellent tank, they build 10 adequate tanks. In war, which philosophy prevails? The mathematics were becoming undeniable. By January 1943, American factories were producing 2,000 tanks monthly. The Detroit arsenal alone exceeded the entire monthly production of all German tank factories combined. The Fisher Body Grand Blanc plant, converted from making Buick automobiles, was producing 500 M4 A2 Shermans monthly, using workers who 6 months earlier had been housewives, store clerks, and farmers. Ford's massive River Rouge complex had switched from building cars to tanks in 12 weeks. General Motors' various divisions contributed 38,000 tanks and tank destroyers to the war effort, along with 854,000 trucks and 1.9 million machine guns. The transformation extended across American industry. The Ford Motor Company alone was manufacturing 1,000 tank engines monthly by mid-1943. Chrysler produced 500 tank transmissions daily. In Pittsburgh, Carnegie Steel was producing armor plate, using a revolutionary new process that reduced production time by 70%. The Budd Company in Philadelphia was stamping out turret castings at rates that exceeded German annual production in a single month. Firestone and Goodyear had converted tire factories to produce tank tracks, manufacturing rubber block tracks that lasted 3 times longer than German steel tracks on hard surfaces. Major General Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, captured at El Alamein, told his British interrogators something that quickly reached American intelligence. We calculated that America might produce 5,000 tanks in 1942 if they mobilized completely. They produced 24,000. We estimated 10,000 for 1943. They are on track for 30,000. We thought in terms of what was possible. They redefined possible. The Sherman tank itself embodied American production philosophy perfectly. Every component was designed for ease of manufacture and maintenance. The Ford GAA V8 engine was essentially a modified aircraft engine, detuned for reliability. The transmission was a standard synchromesh design similar to civilian trucks. The suspension used simple vertical volute springs that any mechanic could replace. The tracks employed rubber blocks that could be replaced individually. Even the turret traverse mechanism used standard industrial components rather than specialized military hardware. This simplicity stood in stark contrast to German design philosophy. The Panther tank, Germany's response to the T-34, used an intricate interleaved road wheel system that provided excellent flotation but required removing multiple wheels to replace one damaged unit. Its final drive was so complex that field repairs were nearly impossible. The Maybach engine, while a masterpiece of engineering, required specialized parts and trained mechanics for even basic maintenance. The Tiger's transmission alone contained over 100 precision-machined components that had to be perfectly aligned. Colonel Hans Muller, assigned to study American industrial methods from captured documents, wrote a classified report in May 1943 that was suppressed by Nazi leadership for its defeatist tone. The Americans have weaponized simplicity itself. Each Sherman requires 30,000 parts, yet they produce them with workers who received 40 hours of training. A 17-year-old girl in Detroit now operates a crane installing turrets on 30 tanks per shift. They have divorced tank production from centuries of metalworking tradition. This is not craftsmanship. This is the industrialization of warfare itself. The production miracle manifested most dramatically in the specialized variants. While Germany produced limited numbers of highly specialized vehicles like the 91 Ferdinand tank destroyers or 18 Sturm Tigers, Americans converted standard Shermans by the hundreds. The M4A3E2 jumbo assault tank, the DD amphibious Sherman, the Sherman Firefly with British 17-pounder gun, the Calliope rocket launcher variant, mine flail tanks, bulldozer tanks, flamethrower tanks. Each modification took weeks, not months, and used primarily standard Sherman components. The true shock came with the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. German forces, expecting to face a few hundred tanks at most, encountered 600 Shermans in the initial assault alone. Oberst Wilhelm Schmalz, commanding the Hermann Göring Division, reported to Kesselring, "The Americans treat tanks as expendable items. They abandon damaged vehicles without attempt at repair. Why? Because new ones arrive daily. I observed a Sherman strike a mine, losing a track. The crew evacuated, and within hours, a recovery vehicle had simply pushed it off the road. The next day, a new Sherman had taken its position. By autumn 1943, the global reach of American production became apparent. The Soviet 5th Guards Tank Corps received 1,000 Shermans through Lend-Lease. British forces in Italy operated more American-built tanks than British ones. Free French forces, rebuilding after the liberation of North Africa, were equipped entirely with American armor. Even Chinese forces in Burma received Shermans. Captain Ernst Hoffmann, intelligence officer with the 2nd SS Panzer Division, intercepted Soviet radio communications discussing the American tanks. One Russian tank commander reported, "The Americans send us tanks still smelling of Detroit factory paint. Instructions are in pictures, not words. Any peasant who can follow drawings can operate them." The German High Command's response revealed their fundamental misunderstanding. Instead of simplifying production, they pursued even greater complexity. The Panther, introduced in 1943, required 2,000 man-hours to build. The Tiger II, entering production in 1944, weighed 70 tons and cost 321,500 Reichsmarks, enough to build 4 Panzer IVs. Each model had unique, non-interchangeable parts. A damaged Tiger II might wait months for a replacement transmission from the sole factory capable of producing it. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel would later admit in his memoirs, "We built superior tanks. The Panther was better than the Sherman in armor, gun, and range. The Tiger could destroy Shermans at distances where return fire was useless. But the Americans built tanks better. When a Panther broke down, it might take a week to get replacement parts. When a Sherman broke down, they simply got another Sherman." The production statistics told an irrefutable story. In 1943, Germany produced approximately 6,000 tanks and assault guns. The United States produced 29,497 tanks that year. In 1944, as Allied bombing intensified, German production increased through superhuman effort to 8,328 tanks. American production reached 17,565 Shermans alone, not counting other vehicle types. Total Sherman production would reach 49,324 units, virtually matching Germany's entire armored vehicle production for the whole war. The strategic bombing campaign created another layer of disparity. While American factories operated in complete safety, German tank plants faced constant bombardment. The Henschel factory in Kassel, producer of Tigers, was bombed 15 times in 1944. MAN in Nuremberg, manufacturing Panthers, lost 70% of its production capacity. Meanwhile, Detroit workers' biggest complaint was overtime schedules as they produced tanks around the clock. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the mathematics of industrial war had reached their logical conclusion. The Allies landed with 6,000 tanks prepared for the invasion. Germany had approximately 1,500 tanks in all of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands combined, with fewer than 500 operational on any given day. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armoured unit near the invasion beaches, had 127 tanks operational on June 6. By noon, 400 Shermans had already landed on the beaches. Major Wilhelm Lankit of the Panzer Lehr Division described the reality of facing American production in Normandy. Every hedgerow concealed tanks, every crossroad bristled with armour. They were not exceptional tanks, but they were everywhere. We ran out of ammunition before they ran out of tanks. We ran out of fuel while their supplies seemed infinite. We realized with growing horror that American factories could replace every tank we destroyed faster than we could reload our guns. The psychological impact proved devastating. Unteroffizier Klaus Weber, a Panther gunner captured in Normandy, told interrogators, "In training, they told us one German tank was worth 10 American tanks. We learned this was true. The problem was the Americans always brought 15. Another captured tanker, Feldwebel Hermann Braun, added, "They never retreated, never tired, never made tactical errors. They simply produced tanks faster than we could destroy them." The American repair and recovery system magnified the production advantage. While German heavy tanks required specialized railroad cars and recovery vehicles, Americans mass-produced M32 recovery vehicles based on the Sherman chassis. Maintenance battalions operated like mobile factories. At repair depots in Normandy, they rebuilt, destroyed Shermans at rates exceeding 100 per week. Power packs could be swapped in 4 hours. Damaged turrets were replaced with salvaged ones from destroyed hulls. 3 knocked-out Shermans routinely yielded 2 operational tanks within 48 hours. Captain Robert Morrison, commanding a maintenance company, described the process. "We applied assembly line principles to battlefield repair. One section replaced tracks, another swapped engines, a third transferred turrets. Our mechanics didn't need to understand the entire tank, just their specific task. This specialization meant we could train replacements in days, not months." The German military attaché in Switzerland, General Major Hans Oster, managed to visit the United States in late 1943 under Red Cross auspices. His secret report to Berlin painted a devastating picture. Detroit alone has 16 buildings dedicated to tank production, each one larger than our biggest factory. They measure output not daily but hourly. Production charts on the walls show real-time progress. I watched teenage girls build 17 tanks in one shift in a single building. They treated it as routine. The report was filed and ignored. Hitler had forbidden defeatist assessments. The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 demonstrated the futility of tactical superiority against industrial supremacy. The German 5th Panzer Army attacked with 262 Panthers and Tigers. Facing them were elements of the American 4th Armored Division with 150 Shermans. The Germans achieved an impressive tactical victory, destroying 48 Shermans while losing 86 of their own tanks. But within 10 days, the Americans had received 60 replacement tanks. The Germans received 12. Colonel Johann von Ravenstein, who commanded a Panther battalion at Aracourt, later wrote, "We won the battle and lost the war in that engagement. Our superior tactics and gunnery meant nothing when the Americans could replace their losses in days while ours were gone forever. We fought a tactical war. They fought an industrial war." The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 represented Germany's last attempt to overcome American production through operational surprise. The Wehrmacht assembled 600 tanks for the offensive, scraping together every available reserve. Within days of the attack beginning, American factories had already produced enough tanks to replace all anticipated losses. General Patton's Third Army lost 270 tanks racing to relieve Bastogne. Within 3 weeks, 350 replacements had arrived from the United States. Obersturmbannführer Jochen Peiper, spearheading the German offensive, reflected, "We destroyed hundreds of American tanks. It was like fighting a hydra. For every tank we destroyed, 2 appeared. We faced not an army but an industrial machine that had already calculated and prepared for our every possible success." Beyond quantity, American factories constantly improved their products. The wet ammunition storage system, introduced after Shermans proved vulnerable to ammunition fires, was retrofitted to thousands of tanks within months. The horizontal volute suspension system, providing better flotation, was integrated into production lines without stopping output. The 76mm gun, developed to counter heavier German armor, was installed in new production and retrofitted to existing tanks simultaneously. German improvements, conversely, often resulted in entirely new models with incompatible parts, creating logistical nightmares. The human dimension of American production proved equally remarkable. By 1944, women comprised 60% of Detroit Arsenal's workforce. They weren't just assembly workers, but crane operators, welders, quality inspectors, and production managers. The training system revolutionized industrial education. Workers received 40 hours of specialized instruction for their specific task. Film strips demonstrated exact hand movements. Jigs and fixtures eliminated guesswork. Quality control inspectors, stationed every 6 positions on the assembly line, caught errors immediately. The rejection rate at Detroit Arsenal was actually lower than German handcrafted production. The fuel situation added another crushing dimension. American tanks ran on gasoline, which America produced in unlimited quantities. The Red Ball Express alone used 7,000 trucks to create a continuous pipeline of fuel from Normandy ports to the front lines. German tanks increasingly relied on synthetic fuel derived from coal, a process requiring enormous electricity and producing limited quantities. By late 1944, many German tanks were abandoned not from battle damage but from empty fuel tanks. SS Hauptsturmführer Wolfgang Müller reported finding 10 abandoned Panthers in perfect mechanical condition, all out of fuel, while American columns passed with hundreds of jerry cans strapped to every vehicle. Colonel Michael Reinhardt, captured in the Ruhr pocket, provided American interrogators with a professional soldier's final assessment. You, Americans, solved modern war. You turned it into an industrial equation where victory equaled production capacity multiplied by logistics divided by distance. We remained romantic warriors pursuing tactical excellence. You became systematic manufacturers pursuing overwhelming abundance. We built tanks like Stradivarius built violins, each one a masterpiece. You built tanks like Ford built Model Ts, each one identical, adequate, infinitely replaceable. In peacetime, our approach created superior machines. In wartime, your approach created certain victory. The numbers by war's end were staggering beyond German comprehension. Total Sherman production reached 49,324 tanks. Germany produced approximately 50,000 armored fighting vehicles of all types, from 1939 to 1945, including assault guns, tank destroyers, and self-propelled artillery. The United States had essentially matched 6 years of German production with a single tank model, while simultaneously producing thousands of other vehicles. The Detroit Arsenal alone, that single factory built on Michigan farmland in 8 months, produced 22,234 tanks, more than Germany's total production of Panthers, Tigers, and Tiger IIs combined. The disparity in specific models was even more telling. Germany produced 1,347 Tiger I tanks, each requiring 6,000 man-hours. In the time it took to build one Tiger, Detroit could produce 40 Shermans. Germany built 492 Tiger II tanks, the most powerful tank of the war. Fischer Body Grand Blanc alone produced 11,358 tanks. Germany's 6,000 Panthers, their most successful medium-heavy tank, were outnumbered 8-1 by Shermans. Lieutenant General Fritz Bayerlein, who served under Rommel in Africa and commanded the Panzer Lehr Division in Normandy, provided the most cogent assessment during his post-war interrogation. The Sherman was not a better tank, it was a better weapon system. It could be mass-produced, easily maintained, quickly replaced, and constantly improved. We Germans built perfect tanks that couldn't be produced in sufficient numbers, couldn't be properly maintained at the front, and couldn't be replaced when lost. The Americans built adequate tanks that could be produced infinitely, maintained by anyone, and replaced immediately. In modern war, adequate and infinite defeats perfect and rare every time. General Hermann Balck, Germany's most successful Eastern Front tank commander, observed, "The Americans fought wastefully but won economically. They would lose 20 tanks, taking a position we would have taken with 2. But those 20 tanks cost them less in resources and time than our 2 cost us. They could afford to trade tanks for time and territory. We could not afford to trade anything for anything." The psychological collapse was complete by early 1945. Feldwebel Erich Müller, a veteran of 4 years of combat, captured near Remagen, told his captors, "How do you defeat a factory? How do you outmaneuver an assembly line? We could win every battle and still lose the war because battles were tactical events while production was a strategic constant." Detroit never slept, never retreated, never surrendered. Every night we went to sleep, Detroit built 50 more tanks. Every battle we won, Detroit had already replaced their losses. We weren't fighting Americans. We were fighting American industry. The disparity in replacement rates told the whole story. A German tank crew losing their vehicle might wait months for a replacement. American crews often received new tanks within 72 hours. Sergeant James Patterson of the 3rd Armored Division lost 4 Shermans in 6 weeks crossing France. Each time, we drew a new tank, gave it the same name with a sequential number, and returned to combat in under 3 days. The 4th tank was actually better than the 1st, incorporating all the latest modifications from Detroit. By March 1945, the situation had become surreal. American armored divisions were abandoning repairable Shermans because new ones were more readily available than spare parts. German units were creating Frankenstein tanks from multiple wrecks. Tiger II companies reported 12 tanks on strength with 3 operational. American tank battalions casually wrote off dozens of damaged tanks, knowing replacements were already crossing the Atlantic. The final irony came in the war's last months. German factories achieved their highest monthly production in March 1945, 1,000 tanks and assault guns, a remarkable achievement under devastating bombardment. That same month, American factories produced 3,000 Shermans. The war ended not with a shortage of German tanks, but with no fuel to run them, no crews to man them, and no battlefield left to deploy them on. General Heinz Guderian, father of German armored warfare, made a buried admission in his memoirs. "We created blitzkrieg, lightning war through mobile armored formations. The Americans created something we never imagined. Produktionskrieg, production war. They achieved strategic victory through industrial superiority before tactical engagement even began. We taught the world how to use tanks in battle. They taught the world that the battle was won in the factory before tanks ever met." The story reached its conclusion on February 15, 1945, when the Detroit Arsenal celebrated its 20,000th tank. Master Sergeant John Williams, who lost his leg when his Sherman was destroyed in Normandy, spoke to the workers. "You never saw battle, but you won the war. Every rivet you placed saved American lives. Not because our tanks were the best, but because there were always enough of them. When my tank was hit, I knew another was already on a ship, probably built by some of you. You won this war at 30 tanks per shift." The Detroit Arsenal continued producing tanks until 1996, manufacturing vehicles for Korea, Vietnam, and Desert Storm. But its greatest achievement remained those 4 years when it proved that modern war was not won by warriors but by workers, not by tactics but by production, not by quality but by quantity. The German generals who mocked American tanks in 1942 discovered a terrible truth. In industrial war, the nation with the best factories defeats the nation with the best soldiers. The legacy extended far beyond World War II, establishing the template for American military dominance, overwhelming industrial capacity married to logistical excellence. The Soviet Union spent the entire Cold War attempting to match American production capacity. They never succeeded. No nation could replicate the unique combination of industrial infrastructure, educational system, and production expertise that America had demonstrated. In May 1945, Colonel Hans von Luck made a final diary entry. "We began this war, believing in the superiority of the German soldier, German engineering, German tactical doctrine. We end it, understanding that in modern war, the nation with the best factories defeats the nation with the best soldiers. Detroit defeated us before our tanks ever left the factory. They won the war in 1941, the moment they decided to build tanks like automobiles. It just took us 4 years to realize we had already lost." The numbers tell the final, irrefutable story. Germany produced 1,347 Tiger I tanks, each a masterpiece requiring 6,000 man-hours. In that time, Detroit could produce 40 Shermans. Germany built 492 Tiger IIs. America built 49,324 Shermans. Germany built 6,000 Panthers. Detroit alone built 22,234 tanks. The Tigers and Panthers were better tanks. The Shermans won the war. Quality versus quantity had been tested on the ultimate battlefield, and quantity had emerged completely, devastatingly, victoriously supreme. The German generals who had mocked American tank production in 1942 learned, at the cost of their nation, that in industrial warfare, the assembly line is infinitely mightier than the sword.